We're looking at one of my favorite objects in the collection today, but what's special about this manuscript is the incredible story within it. Hi, I'm Beth Morrison, Senior Curator of Manuscripts here at the Getty Museum. I've been studying manuscripts since I was 15 years old, and I'm fortunate enough to still be doing it today. This manuscript contains a text called the Roman de Gillian de Trazegnies, which is just the romance of this man named Gillian. Romance in the Middle Ages just meant that it was a fictional work. It was written probably in Bruges in 1464, and the artist is a man named Lieven van Latham. And he was really known as one of the great artists of the Northern Renaissance, of his time period. This is the first illumination in the book, and it's called a frontispiece. It kind of sets the tone for the rest of the manuscript. As you can see, it's quite a large illumination with a beautiful decorated border around it. It sets the tone for the entire story because the main character, the author, is shown 3 times within the illumination. He's wearing a blue coat and a red hat, and you can see him in the very back of the illumination talking to a monk. He's actually a visitor to the abbey in what is present-day Belgium, and he comes around into the church and he sees a tomb, and the tomb has a man with a woman on either side of him, his 2 wives. And the author says, well, that's pretty unusual. And so he asks the head monk, what in the world is the deal with this tomb? And the monk says, actually, it's a great story. We have a whole book about it, but it's written in Italian. And the author thinks it's such a great story that he goes back to his own study and translates it into French. And the French story is the exact text that you see throughout the rest of the manuscript. A few pages further on, we start to hear more about Gillian and his wife, Marie. He was a nobleman, but he actually married someone of a slightly higher rank in the nobility named Marie. And they were very happy. They had a beautiful castle, but unfortunately, she couldn't get pregnant. And they were both very sad about their inability to have children. This image, which is only an inch or a little bit more in height, shows an entire world set within this tiny space. It shows Gillian and his wife Marie. They're holding hands as they peer out the window of their castle. And they're talking about how even the carp in the moat around their castle have children and they don't. And when you look at the amazing amount of detail that this artist was able to capture in this tiny space, it's absolutely amazing because it actually blows up really well. Not every artist can paint on this kind of detailed level and then have it hold together as an artwork. That was the sheer genius of Lieven van Latham. So now we'll move a little bit further into the story. Gillian, his wife, actually prayed to God that they would be able to have children. And that very night, she became pregnant. And so Gillian had promised God that if his wife became pregnant, he would go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Unfortunately, he is waylaid by pirates on the high seas, and he's actually captured by a Muslim army. And here we have the image of this amazing sea battle, and you can see that there's just arrows going back and forth across the different boats, and you can see Gillian really fighting for his life. Throughout the course of the story, many things happen, including poor Gillian's wife, Marie, thinking that he's dead. And in fact, he had twin sons from that pregnancy. And at that point, the twin sons go off to try to find their father. And when Gillian falls in love with the Saracen princess, the daughter of the emir, he also thinks that Marie has died in childbirth. And so he's able to marry Gracienne, his second wife. But we're going to move very rapidly to the end of the manuscript and sort of the end of the story. So at this point in the story, Gillian has discovered that he's an unwitting bigamist, and he decides the best way to handle the situation is to have his 2 wives meet. So he convinces Gracienne to come back with him to what is modern-day Belgium in order to meet his first wife. This is the scene where Gracienne is saying goodbye to her father, the emir, and departing with Gillian and his 2 sons to go back to Belgium. It's probably my favorite illumination in the entire book because the artist had never been to the Holy Land. This is supposed to be happening in Egypt, in fact. It doesn't look anything like Egypt. It looks just like Ghent or Bruges in modern-day Belgium. Beautiful Northern Renaissance buildings, winding rivers, hilltops in the distance, very much like a Belgian landscape, not like Egypt. But the artist, of course, needed to indicate that it was happening in a far-off exotic land, and so he includes some scimitars, throws some turbans on people, and my favorite detail is that very far off on the right-hand corner, you see a couple camels, because camels equal Egypt. So it's these kind of little signifiers that the artist, who had never been probably outside of Belgium, put into the illumination to indicate that it was happening in a far-off land. Gracienne kisses her father goodbye, there are tears everywhere, and they depart. The end of the story is that Gracienne and Marie meet. I personally would think it probably wouldn't go so well, but according to the text, they immediately just loved each other, and they didn't want to cause Julien any kind of embarrassment, so they decided to go to a nunnery together and become nuns. Almost instantly, they both die. Very sad. Julien returns to Holy Land to fight on behalf of the emir. He dies gloriously in battle, and his body is carried back by his son to Belgium to be interred in that tomb that we saw at the very beginning of the manuscript. And therefore, the author's question is finally answered. Why was this one man buried beside two wives? The end.